Okay, welcome to the Village Board Work Session meeting for Thursday, October 24th. This is a meeting to talk with or talk about the zoning code update. We have guests here this evening, Chris Kushel from Fisher Associates, as well as Jill Wiedrick, our zoning czar. The zoning czar. No, she's not the zoning czar. She's the village planner. We'll go with that. It does sound kinder. I'm going to ask Jill to take care of the roll call, and then we'll get the meeting started.
Okay, Trustee Wojka.
Here.
Trustee Banaski.
Good evening.
Trustee Mishler.
Here.
Trustee Briggs.
Here.
Mayor Domerat.
Here. So tonight is a work session meeting, so there won't be a public comment component to this meeting, but I would like to welcome all of the members of this community who've decided to take this evening to join us for this, as well as I want to welcome the members of the Zoning Code Work Group who have been working diligently with as a team to bring this presentation to the village board. So with that,
Could the team stand up or just wave or something?
if you want to, stand up or wave. We appreciate, I know that not every member of the team is here this evening, but I really want to make sure that I say thank you from all of us for the work that you've put in. I know you've been meeting a lot to try and work through some challenges. So thank you. Jill, with that, I'm going to turn things over to you and Chris, unless I've forgotten something. Have I forgotten anything? You know what? I'll throw in one more thing. For everybody who's in the room, as well as for the board, we don't have the slides in front of us that we're going to see in just a minute, but tomorrow or the next day, they will be all available on the zoning code update webpage at fairportny.com, and Jill will have them posted, and we can all take a look at them in more detail because I know we're going to be talking about this again in the near future. So take it away.
All right. Okay, can you hear me okay? All right. Thanks for having me tonight. So I'll walk through the presentation. If you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so for tonight's meeting, I'm going to give a little bit of a presentation summarizing the process that we've really done to date with a focus on the community engagement efforts that we've had and how that has led into really a focus that we want to get input from the village board over either tonight and or a following meeting related to what have been some of the more, let's call it hot button issues, and then also discuss some next steps. Thank you. So those issues in particular that we're hoping to kind of hone in on relate to an update to the non-conforming regulations as it relates to within what are zoned today as single-family districts, conversions of from single-family to two families, and accessory dwelling units. Just a little bit of a delay. Okay. All right, so here's a summary, which I've shown before, but this is a bit updated of our project schedule. Originally, we were, thinking that this would wrap up around the end of the calendar year, and I think realistically it's going to be extending probably a few months beyond that. This was due in really related to the community engagement efforts. We ended up doing, I think, more than originally envisioned. As well as we just got so much information that it took a while to do the synthesis for all of that. In the meantime, we have started laying out the code in terms of the template itself. There's a lot of boilerplate types of information, so we're able to do that sort of concurrently as we're waiting to get some of the more specific feedback from the village board. I should also mention that there was also a parking study that was done as part of this, and we'll be having those results fairly soon as well. So earlier was mentioned the zoning working group. The purpose of this group was to really help guide the process, to help with all aspects of community engagement, both the outreach, the synthesis of that, getting the word out, and et cetera. The members of that, it's village staff, it's also members of village boards. The county has a role in that, and the Genesee Transportation Council, who is funding this work.
A portion of it.
A portion of this work, thank you. So we've met now, I think I have the right number, it's about 7 times, give or take, a number of different topics, but as you can see from the list there, really what we've focused on to date has really been aspects related to engagement. So first, preparing for getting the word out, then preparing for the actual events themselves, and then synthesizing that information, and then kind of trying to take that information and make some recommendations to the board on how to move forward on some of these issues. So I'm not going to read that long list there, but I just wanted to provide sort of a comprehensive list of the ways that we were trying to get the word out. And I can just say from my own experience, I mean, I feel like this was sort of a gold standard in terms of the efforts that were made in a variety of ways, from social media, from online different types of sources, to printing out the postcards and mailing them, to other means as well. So we really put every effort we could to really make people aware of the process and provide opportunities to participate. The image there, we put together an initial community engagement plan at the beginning. It was intended to be sort of a living document, and as it went along, we revised it when we had additional information to put into that document. And then here is sort of the flip side, which is what the actual outreach methods were. And again, I think it's the same theme here, that we provided, or we tried to provide, as many opportunities as we could. And these were created in a way so that people didn't need to do multiple things. They could, if they only wanted to go to the in-person forum and not engage in some of the other ways, they could provide and hear the same kinds of information, so people weren't forced to do multiple events. But at the same time, there were people who wanted to do multiple events because either they were really interested, or they had additional thoughts that they came back later. And so again, these opportunities, there were in-person opportunities, there were drop-in office hours that we had, and each of those were multiple days. We set up at the farmers market, where we had a lot of people, just kind of passersby, join and learn and provide their input there. As part of that, we did a couple walking tours, which I thought were really great ways to have kind of small, more informal conversations among smaller groups of people who are interested in walking along Main Street. And then there were a number of online mechanisms, both a survey and there was a public input website that was able to take emails and voicemails and other things and tabulate them that way. And so I just want to give a shout out to GTC. Not only did they provide funding, but they were really integral, I'd say, in terms of helping with engagement. They provided this public input website, which really acted as a community engagement hub. They also spent a lot of their time helping to compile and synthesize the information, and we really got a wide range of comments, and I think Jill found that it was something along the lines of like a 15% participation rate among the community, which is extremely strong for a project of this nature.
It's incredible. If you recall...
Turn your mic on, or talking to the mic.
Sorry, if you recall, one of the times that I was here, and Chris, that we were chatting initially about this project, we had hoped to get 5 to 10% participation. In the planning world, that's huge. So when we do the math and we get 15%, that's significant. And very exciting, I think, for us planners.
Can you shared some data about Parma and the town of Parma this morning?
So at any given time, any municipality may be updating their zoning code, their comprehensive plan, et cetera. The town of Parma is currently updating their zoning code, and they have a population of 16,000 people. They had received 12 comments and had 30 people attend their public meeting. So I think The number of people that we've had engaged in this process is a direct result, as Chris mentioned, of the different means that we try to engage people. So we know that some people prefer to meet in person. We know that some people prefer to sit on their couch with their cat or dog and watch an online presentation. So we had all of those different opportunities for people to engage with the process. And as a result, we have great feedback to use moving forward.
So during these events, we covered a whole wide range of topics. Here's one example. One of the things we did was what's called a visual preference survey. And so we asked people for different parts of your village to rate different buildings, what they liked, and by that nature, what they didn't like. And this was really helpful for the zoning, because now what we can do is we can see the buildings that people tended to gravitate towards, and then we can actually tease out what the characteristics of those buildings are and put those into the regulations themselves. So we did this for multiple areas of the village, primarily focused on your downtown along Main Street. So, as I alluded to earlier, there's certainly a sort of a hot button topic that's kind of emerged. And so that's what I want to kind of spend the time on for the remainder of this presentation. Because most of the comments really came down to comments that had anything to do where there was the potential for change in what are today your single-family zoning districts. So I want to talk a little bit about why we even brought this up, and then some of the things that we've thought about for moving forward. So, in terms of why the topic was initially raised, we weren't starting from scratch with this process. Because you have a recently adopted comprehensive plan that has a number of recommendations, that was sort of the starting point. I know that there had been some feedback about presenting information too early and the kind of maybe the message that sent, but the reason we had to do that, I think, was because one, like I said, we weren't starting from scratch, and two, I find that people need something to react to, and so if we didn't provide anything for them to react to, we would just be in the same exact position just a few months later down the road. So I think it ultimately, in my mind, I think it was helpful to show early on. So the comprehensive plan, I'm not going to go through all of this, but just as a reminder, next slide, okay. So your comprehensive plan sets forth this articulated vision for what your future will be. You'll do it, okay. And so your comprehensive plan then sets out these goals. And in Fairport's comprehensive plan, you've categorized them into these different categories. And then zoning can help achieve the goals within those categories. And some of those categories are more impacted by zoning and some a little bit less so. Just want to draw out a couple of them here. As it relates specifically to this question about housing, there were some goals related to providing different types of housing choices in both the land use goal as well as within one of the goal 5, provide diverse housing choices. There's also a goal related to focusing less on the use of the districts and thinking more about the character of the neighborhoods. And so these are sort of where we were thinking of at the starting point to help and figure out how can we achieve some of these goals through the zoning. Next slide. So then what we did was we said, okay, given those goals, let's look at some of the data. And when you look at this map here shows within areas that are zoned as single-family districts, that's actually not the case of what's on the ground today. That all of those non-beige colored parcels are 2 families and 3 families. So we said, okay, that's what's on the ground today. We then zoomed in a little bit further, and if you go to the next slide, and said, okay, what are these buildings? And these are what those buildings are. So these are the 2 and 3 families that are within the village. And I'd say it's probably hard to argue that these don't fit the character of the village. And so I think the question then became, if you go to the next slide, given all that, the zoning working group felt that it was fair to ask, and I still think it's fair to ask, are there circumstances where you would be okay having this within your community in the future? That was really the crux, and I hear a no in the crowd, but that was still the crux of the question. Next slide. There was a narrative that emerged about allowing high-density multifamily in the village, and whether this was due to misunderstanding or misinformation. I just want to be clear that the zoning working group never considered what I call high-density multifamily, which are those images on the top, which certainly would not be appropriate for residential neighborhoods in any sort of historic village setting. That the question really always related to, are there ways, and is it appropriate to have this sort of smaller scale multifamily, and by multifamily meaning these 2 and 3 family structures. And the other thing I just wanted to sort of, providing context here, that this zoning code is going to be well over 200 pages, and the vast, vast majority of the comments really did relate to this question that is actually a very small portion of the code itself. And it's not to say that this isn't an important question. I just wanted to raise that as, this is just to keep in context for all of the other parts that will need to go into this code from.
Can I pause you before?
Yes.
Before you get off of this page. So for everybody at the board who's looking at this, all of these categories are all part of the zoning code review and update, but the portion that we're talking about today only falls really into a little bit of number 3 and number 4 for the most part?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. So the public input website was able to distill this information using like AI and look at things in different ways and cut and slice the data different ways. But I also just did this in an old school way, and I printed out every single comment and every single email, and I read every single one, and I just did a very simple coding of pro or con, essentially, if it was relevant to this issue. I'd say from looking at everything, and I did the math up then after and counted it all up, excluding sort of the emails, and I'll talk about that separately, it was basically a split in terms of people who are what I would call pro, meaning they support to some degree in some way these 2 and 3 family types of multifamily homes. And there's nuance there. Some people said the more the merrier, great. Others said, well, under certain conditions, okay, types of thing. Versus what I'm
going to ask the folks who are sitting here in the room to please not make comments so that we can focus on what the speaker's saying. Thank you.
Versus then the anti was the other half. And also, so then there was also emails. The emails were all sort of, I'd say, overwhelmingly anti. They seemed to come kind of around the same time, and I suspect that they were responding in particular to some letter that was apparently circulating in the village. They didn't seem to be responding to actual materials provided from any of the public engagement, from what I could tell. That being said, so in general, these what I'm calling anti comments, they went into some different buckets. These buckets, I've listed them here. That this is admittedly sort of a simplification just to categorize them. There were a number of comments, in particular from these emails, that just essentially said no to this whole project. Essentially, there wasn't really much additional context. There was a large category here. The second category that I listed, I think, is the more sort of important one for us to kind of pay attention to in my mind, because they had a whole host of concerns. And these concerns, I'd say, ranged from, either from valid or certainly worthy of consideration to others that were, just frankly, overtly xenophobic types of comments. There were a number of comments I'm just noting related to concerns about renters. A lot of them were disparaging, maybe a little bit stereotypical, I'd say. And we talked about this, and I just think it really came down to less a concern about the renter and more concern about bad landlords, I'd say, at its heart. There were a group of comments where they really just didn't agree with the comprehensive plan. There's certainly valid comments. However, I think the village's position here is that the comprehensive plan was adopted, and we're here to write zoning to help implement the comprehensive plan. And then there were these concerns over this high-density multifamily concern, which again could mean multiple things, and trying to understand what exactly was the concern could be a little bit challenging. Next slide. So we took all this information, and the zoning working group, met to discuss all of this feedback. We met multiple times, spent multiple hours discussing really just this one issue, this one topic. Did a lot of additional mapping analysis, so that's what all this range of maps show. It's not to explain exactly what they are here, but just to show that this group really took seriously the efforts to try and make a recommendation to this board. If you go to the next slide, the other point that I want to make was that as part of these discussions, and something that I think kind of gets lost in maybe among the public is that it's not sort of a black and white or a binary either or in terms of what the options are. Jill is described as it's sort of like a choose your own adventure. There are so many different options for what could be done here in terms of any sort of change that could take place in any of the districts. And so, again, I just listed out all of these different options that were discussed in one way or another, just to give a sense. But even within all of this bullet point, just again emphasizing it never was intended, or there was never any discussion about anything that was sort of what I would call like high-density multifamily, like apartment buildings or anything like that. The group actually, and I'll show this in a slide or two later, really honed in on a couple options. The first option was to not actually make any future changes to the districts themselves, but rather just to have a mechanism in the zoning code to deal with what you have today. So this wouldn't make additional changes in the future. It wouldn't increase the number of 2 or 3 family homes, but really it's acknowledging the fact that you do have them there today. And these homes today really have no pathway to improve, to make a renovation, to add a deck, to redo their kitchen. And so this was something that the group did feel like, and I'd say unanimously pretty quickly, does need to be dealt with. And it's really a process issue. Yes, ma'am.
So I hear you talking about this, but we do have a particular district in the Village of Fairport, the RE district, which is currently zoned that allows single-family, 2-family, and 3-family homes. So you're not talking about changing that particular district. You're talking about homes that exist as non-conforming homes in all of the other districts.
Yes, thank you.
Am I correct?
You're correct. Thank you for
Okay.
that clarification. Yes, so these are existing non-conforming homes in the other districts where they're not otherwise allowed. And so this is simply a matter of helping to clarify the process so that they can have a process to improve. So right now it's essentially a disincentive to do anything. And these projects, I think Jill had some great analogy or metaphor related to healthcare, and I can't think of what it was, but essentially, right now these homes are essentially set up to die, as opposed to having the opportunity to improve, since they are already there today. So this was the first one. So the second one, again, among...
Yeah, I guess it has to do with the code. So an existing home that got all the proper permits, 30 years ago, and now it's a 2 or 3 family. And you may live there, you may not, but there are 3 units. Right now, our code would not let those buildings make any upgrades or...
Correct. If you recall, I want to say it was probably about 6 months ago, we had a similar situation on Parse Avenue, where it was zoned B1. And at the time where that zoning district was created, I think the presumption was that these properties over time would be converted to businesses. Well, that didn't happen. And what we saw were a number of the properties were single family, 2-family, and 3-family. So when they were in that business district, the business district says, we want commercial things. Everything else we don't want. And anything that's there, it's called non-conforming. And in the zoning world, those non-conformities are things that you want to go away. but oftentimes they're actually the most interesting things in a community. So you need to figure out, how do you allow for nonconformities, allow for things to continue to live without expanding and taking over a district? So we said, how do we allow these folks that are living in these single-family, two-family, and three-family homes to continue to improve? And just as Chris said, if I lived on Parse and I had a single family, that B1 zoning district made me nonconforming. And if I wanted to update my kitchen and move things around and change plumbing, or if I wanted to expand my bathroom or move my bathroom, I couldn't get a building permit to do that. So that's why we brought forward the LCR, because that said, okay, you can be a little bit of business, you can have small scale business, but residential is a permitted use here. So it took all of those properties out of the, we don't want you to exist, to, hey, we'd like you to continue to improve your properties. So when we talk about updating the non-conforming regulations, it means that we want to continue to provide life to these properties so that they're maintained and taken care of, so that, and here's a story, and this isn't, but I'll make up a story, because people like to hear stories, right? So imagine I buy a 3-family home on Woodlawn, and I live in the first unit, and I have 2 other units, and I recognize that maybe the bathroom on the second unit is a little small. And I want to make it a little bit larger because I know some people like larger bathrooms. I love big bathtubs, right? And I go to Mark and I say, hey, I've got my contractors lined up. They're going to expand this bathroom. I'm just going to take a little bit out of the 1 bedroom. And because I'm non-conforming in the district, Mark says, you can't do that. So I say, well, now what am I supposed to do? Nobody's going to want to rent this unit, perhaps, because my bathroom is now really small. Maybe I just leave it the way it is. And so I'm not investing in my property. And I think when you walk around the village of Fairport, you see a lot of properties that are incredibly well maintained, that people take pride in them. And we want to create regulations and requirements that allow properties to continue, not to expand. So we're not talking an expansion of those properties that might be 2 or 3 families, but allow improvements that anybody would do in their homes.
So originally, when you went through and got all the proper variances,
Yeah.
to take that Woodlawn home as a single and turn it into a 3-family,
Yeah.
even though you got all the right permits and zoning and all of that, and everyone gave you the variances, it's still considered a non-conforming property?
Correct. So if you look at our zoning code, we have uses that are permitted, which means you can come in and not have to go through a special process. You can get a building permit or what have you. And then we have uses that are specially permitted, which means you have to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and they look at different things. And then, of course, we have uses that don't appear on those lists. And those uses that are existing in those districts that don't have a place on either list are non-conforming. Whether they were conforming in a previous zoning code or they were built at a time when it was an allowed use, when that zoning code changes, it renders them non-conforming. The community has said, we don't want the use in the district. Does that help?
A little.
Okay.
But if I, just to emphasize, basically what it does is it disincentivizes taking care of any of the properties.
Correct.
And that ultimately ends up leading to situations that it sounds like some folks were reacting negatively to when they're thinking about talking about renters. They're actually thinking about the building being not as nice as it could be. And it sounds like what you're saying is, well, right, if they wanted to make it nicer.
Potentially.
In some cases
Potentially. I mean, you're always going to have people, your neighbors, that maybe don't maintain the property the way you expect, right? But we want to create a situation where those existing homes, that we have a community have an expectation that you will continue to upkeep and do those things to your home to have it be part of the community, that you're allowed to do so.
Jill, how would you explain then the non-conforming properties that actually are really updated? How would that have happened? Because I do live in one.
You do live in one.
Yes, it is
So-
non-conforming and it is very updated.
Okay. Sometimes people do work without permits. And I'm not saying that that happened in your property, but there are times where people may do stuff. And this is not that they're saying, the heck with government, I'm just going to do what I want. Some people don't recognize that some things require permits, right? And so that's a little bit of education that I'm hopeful that once we are able to produce an updated code, that part of that will be an education component. Hey, what permits are required for what? So it's the big part is communication. So
that's the only explanation? Because it's the only explanation? That's the only explanation?
if they're getting a use variance to make updates, there's.
Okay. I'm just
I
curious.
can't speak on your particular situation because I haven't done the research into it.
I
But we
can't
can
either.
most definitely, we can look at the records and take a look, hey, how did things happen? But when we have nonconformities, it's best to figure out if those are nonconformities that we like in our community, we're accepting of in our community, to figure out how to allow those to continue to live.
Thank you.
Could you, because you've talked in some zoning other workshops where always allowed, never allowed, under certain circumstances, right? So could you, part of a special circumstance would be, if you are in an existing 2 to 3 family non-conforming, you could remodel or update without turning around and turning the whole district into, all 2 and 3 families.
Correct, and that's where the proposal comes from, to take a look at the non-conforming regulations and update them for that. They would be, the non-conforming regulations are specific to those properties that are non-conforming. They would not give additional rights or abilities to any of the other properties. So we're saying, hey, if you're a 2-family and you're on whatever property, whatever street in a district that perhaps does not allow a 2-family, that with an update of the non-conforming regulations, you would be allowed to make these changes.
So I'm going to ask this question to maybe help clarify that. So let's go back to, what street were you on that you bought a house? Woodlawn?
Woodlawn.
Okay, so you have this house that's a pre-existing, non-conforming 3-family house, and you want to do some updates and you're not allowed.
Correct.
But now, the neighbor across the street saw that and said, I have a single-family home. I want to make my single-family home a multifamily home. It's in a non-conform, it's in a district that does not allow that use, correct?
Correct. And
So
a
they're not going to
single-
be able to go in and say, hey, I want to make my house multifamily too.
Correct. So if you are conforming in the district, which means you're on that list, you don't get to become something that's non-conforming, right? The community has said, you're not on the list, we don't want you. So if my neighbor across the street has a single family, and they say, you know what, I see that Jill's got this 3-family, and it looks like she's having a lot of fun. She's got some great folks that are renting from her. I'd like to do that same thing. That's not something that's possible.
This update does not allow that.
The proposal that we're talking about in terms of updating those non-conforming regulations are specific to those properties only that are non-conforming in the district. It does not give the ability to go from a single family to a 3-family for those currently existing single-family homes.
I understand.
Okay.
Does that help Tracy too?
Yeah.
Okay. You guys okay? Okay.
All right, those are really great clarifying questions. So that was that option. So now we're going to move to the option B. Next slide, please. So this was now the question of, are there situations where you would allow a single family to become multifamily of some sort? And so this was where the hours and hours of the conversation with the zoning working group was really focused on. Went through all the different options and permutations, and sort of honed in on if they were going to recommend it. It was really just, this is a list here of what sort of felt potentially palatable. So this group, after spending all the hours, really couldn't come to a consensus. Eventually, it just decided to, let's just take a vote among the group. I was not a voting member. I'm not part of the working group. So just to clarify that, I don't have a horse in this race. I'm here to do whatever the village board tells me to do. So ultimately, the group felt like this was sort of a 3-2 against recommending that we do this. The reasons I think were varied, but it sort of came down to the feeling of, on the one hand, it's feeling a bit like a distraction because this is sort of a small thing. There's also the feeling that the zoning code isn't intended to be etched in stone, that it's intended to be a living document, and so that, if you don't do it now, that doesn't mean you couldn't reconsider it in the future. Sort of one of the counter arguments to that was that this really isn't a huge change, and it is like a right step to do it now. So I'm just sharing kind of both sides of what we heard. But in terms of what the scenario that kind of got honed in on was, I just want to kind of clarify that. So first, it was only to allow conversions of homes. So that's to keep the character. It's not to allow a building to be a single family to be torn down and put up any sort of block apartment building or anything like that. It was a conversion of your existing homes to keep the existing character. Only to allow for 2 families. So again, after debate, it thought, you know what, let's not make it 3 families, let's make it 2 families as the maximum. Only via a special permit. So Jill just talked about how there's different options. There's by right, which by right doesn't mean you can just do it. It means that there's still criteria, whether it's height, setbacks, whatnot. But a special permit provides the special permit granting authority the discretion to say no, based upon the individual sort of situation of whatever the proposal is. All of these types of sort of what we call them, area characteristics, the dimensional characteristics, the parking, that would also still have to be met, of course. And then the other piece that I just wanted to note, I think that kind of covers everything there. So if you go to the next slide, we wanted to kind of see like what's the impact, and the other criteria was we're going to base it on size of the existing structure. So it wouldn't be applicable for every single family home. The thought being that it would be limited to homes throughout the village. So there was conversation, do we only do it in sort of that historic core where you see them today, or do you allow them in some of the areas like in your southeast and northeast areas? And the thought was, from a sort of a fairness point of view, if we're going to do it, allow it be done village-wide. The thought was it would be limited to homes of a certain size so that the subdivision of the homes would be large enough that it would be sort of probably palatable or appropriate for families and things like that. So we looked at a couple options. One was if the homes or the structures were 2,500 square feet and 3,000 square feet. And you can see there, this only would apply or be applicable to, as a percentage, a fairly small percentage of the homes in the district. So less than 10%, less than 7% of the if you use 2,500 square feet as the cutoff, or only 36 homes if you made it 3,000 square feet as the cutoff. And even that number doesn't mean that all of them would be converted, of course, because not everybody wants to convert their home just because they could. And again, this doesn't also look at all those other characteristics like the setbacks and the parking, so the true number would even be lower than that. So I'll pause there since we had questions about the option A, but I'll just pause here to see if there's any clarifying questions now about option B.
I want to test my understanding. So it's only for homes in this particular description. It can be located anywhere in the village, but the original home has to be at least 3,000 square feet.
Or 2,500 square feet. Again, we
One
just did some tests to get a sense. It could be something else. We just looked at these as examples.
So let's say we said it has to be at least 3,000 square feet so that when the home was converted, there could be a reasonable amount of size to accommodate families versus just a one-bedroom, which would accommodate one single or one couple. The other piece of it would be that it would have to conform with having enough parking spots to support, based on what is in our code today, or whatever it ends up being, to support for each one of those households. There would need to be enough parking spots off-street. Is it also in our code today that the parking would have to be behind the location?
So one of the things, with any code, we get to decide what those parameters look like as a community. The basis for this idea came from currently in the RE district. We have regulations that are similar to what we're discussing, and that the minimum structure size is 1,500 square feet. So when you consider dividing that up, it could potentially, when you're talking about common areas, it could be 600 square feet a unit, which isn't necessarily a large place for a family. So when we had this discussion, we thought that, okay, let's test 2,500 and 3,000. So there are other things that can go along with that. You could say the lot size has to be X number of square feet. You have to provide X number of parking spaces. The entrance to the second dwelling unit has to be located at the rear. You can't make any changes to the facade of the structure. So there are all these parameters that you can create based on whatever the desires are of the community. Beyond that, so if the discussion has been about it being specially permitted, which is a process where it's a yes, maybe, but provides a board the opportunity to listen to public comment and either approve or deny, and also approve with conditions or things that could mitigate potential impacts that the board has heard from the public. And if a property was not meeting all of those criteria, they wouldn't be eligible to go for a special permit. It would be a use variance. And when I talk about use variances, the odds of getting a use variance are 0.00001, because you're saying, I want to do a use that the community has said, no way. So there's a lot of parameters that we can build in to create the opportunity, yet have it be controlled to the community's desires.
Do you guys have any questions at this end? I can see this end because I'm looking over here, so I just want to make sure that I wasn't ignoring you. Do you have any questions about this? So this is just another option for us to consider.
Can I ask a parking question? In our code today, do we have a parking number per bedroom in a multifamily? So like, let's say a one bedroom, or is it required to have two parking spots for that one bedroom unit?
So I'll read through this. Currently, a one-family detached is 2 per dwelling unit, and a two-family and multifamily is also 2 per dwelling unit. So let's say you had a two-family, you're required to provide 4 spaces. That can be 2 spaces in a garage and 2 spaces, in the driveway. Our parking spaces are 9 by 19 currently. So we would look at that in terms of how does that fit on your property.
So, but each family unit isn't necessarily categorized by number of bedrooms.
Correct.
Okay.
There are some municipalities that choose to assess parking for two-family and multifamily based on the number of bedrooms. Our code does not do that.
Okay, thank you.
Our current code.
Got it, thanks.
19 feet?
Correct.
Huh. I'm used to 20 or 18. Okay.
And-
We're special.
And the last thing, I know you're ready to move on to the next thing. This topic was discussed, and this was really kind of like 3 against and 2 for, whereas the previous recommendation was unanimous.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I just want to say that the zoning working group has had really, really great conversations. And when Chris mentioned that we took a lot of time for these things, it's because we wanted to make sure that we were acknowledging all the comments that were received and really considering the pros and cons of different options. So it was a great conversation, and I think that there was a lot of vulnerability and a lot of discussion that happened because of the comments that were received and the thoughts of the land use board members in particular, having experiences with some applications and different elements of this discussion.
Keep going.
Sure, and I'll just add to that point. I've been very impressed with the way the discussions have been, especially because members of the group didn't agree on a lot of things. They were very respectful, and it was just a really, I think, productive conversations that were held, and it was great to be part of that. So that's the second one. We're on to the last topic now, if you go to the next slide, which was related to accessory dwelling units, which sometimes are called granny flats, in-law apartments. They have a whole bunch of different names. It's something that tends to draw very strong feelings among the community, and this was certainly the case here as well. And again, it was relatively split in terms of pro and against. But again, the pro, to be clear, was not, for the most part, sort of, yes, do whatever you want with accessory dwelling units. There was a lot of sort of maybes or yes, if types of things. And so we really wanted to, and that's what the group spent a lot of time thinking through. Again, there's so many different options here. There's accessory dwelling units that are inside the primary structure today. There's accessory dwelling units that are separate little tiny houses in someone's yard that they build, or in a detached garage, for example. There's all different rules that can be attached to an accessory dwelling unit on when it can be built or when it's appropriate to be built. So the group had a lot of discussion here. They did come to a consensus, and I think it ended up being, from what I recall, a unanimous kind of recommendation to allow accessory dwelling units with some very specific parameters to control for them, essentially. I have on there again, why did we even think about this? Because it's in your comprehensive plan, and so it felt it was a responsibility then to raise that and ask about it. So if you go to the next slide, I have what those conditions are. First, only allowing it that is either internal or attached to the structure itself, and when I say attached, to the rear of the structure, so it's hidden from the public right-of-way. And so it would not allow, to clarify, something like a carriage house to be converted. There was a lot of discussion about that on whether it should be allowed, and I think the group felt like it maybe could have gone either way. As opposed to something like what I said, like a tiny house kind of thing that was very quickly discarded as not being appropriate for a lot of reasons, and the group felt very comfortable taking that off the equation very quickly. The second thing was to limit the ADU to a certain level of size, and that's to ensure that this really is an accessory unit. This is not sort of a de facto two-family home. It's accessory. And also limiting it to a single bedroom. And again, thinking through what is the purpose of an ADU. It's kind of different in a way from the previous discussion of option B, which is option B is thinking about, are there ways to allow more families here? This is really for, thinking what's the original intent? Is it for an au pair? Is it for an aging parent? Those types of things. And so that's why this is an ADU is kind of a tool to address those needs. It would only be allowed on homes that have a single home. So if you were one of those non-conforming two-family homes, you cannot build an ADU. So you can't have 3 units on that already non-conforming lot. So it's only applicable for single-family homes. And then again, with the other, as with the other discussion, parking needs still need to be met, and all of the other characteristics, the dimensional standards, et cetera, would need to be met as well. So that was where the group landed. Yes.
Just clarify really simply the difference between a double and an ADU, if they're going to only be internal or added on the back, because I thought an ADU it's a separate address. It's got, okay, see, here we go.
So, first off, an accessory dwelling unit can be whatever a community defines it as. So Chris mentioned that you can limit the floor area. The whole idea when we say accessory dwelling unit is that it is just that, accessory. So a two-family, when we talk about a two-family, both units can be the same size. Let's say we have 2 units and they're each 2,000 square feet. There's not one that's principal. In the discussion about an accessory dwelling unit, it's clear that that single-family home is the principal unit. And let's suppose that we limited the addition or that internal area to 400 square feet. That's it. So it doesn't function as a two-family because it's not equal to. They're not equal. It's clear that there is one principal in the situation.
But you could have, like, bathrooms, kitchens, all of that? They could be studios, one-bedrooms.
And we also discussed limiting it to a single bedroom. So, that it's truly then for the in-law, the au pair, as Chris mentioned. The intent is not to create an entirely, a second dwelling unit.
And one other criteria that we did say that we wanted to, it would be prohibited from being used as a short-term rental. That was the other, I forgot to put that up as a bullet point. So you couldn't use it as an Airbnb. That was one of the concerns that was discussed. And Mark felt comfortable being able to enforce that, because I know that would be a question.
Any questions down here? Any further go ahead. I'm gonna let Adam go, and then I'll come to you, Emily.
Okay, so I'm just, I wanted to check in real quick. So limit on gross floor area and limited to a single bedroom. So when I first read that, I, in my mind, said, oh, it's like a single bedroom with like maybe a little kitchenette and like a place to watch watch TV. Is that what that sentence
Well, I mean, they're
means,
two
or-
separate criteria. So let's say it's
Right.
limited to, 600 square feet.
Right.
That's the size of it. And it can only be one bedroom, right? It can't be a two-bedroom ADU. So
Right.
the rest of the space could be used however you want to make it. But yes, it
Okay.
would have probably a small kitchen or kitchenette area
Gotcha.
and a bathroom.
Okay.
Well, I have a neighbor who has an apartment that was built in the 30s as worker housing. It's a one-bedroom apartment, galley kitchen, living room, dining room that's not very big, single bedroom, and a bathroom off of the single bedroom. Is that the kind of space? And I think it's like between 600 and 800 square feet.
I mean, there's certainly different configurations, but yes, my first home was 420 square feet. This is in downtown Boston, and it was a single bedroom. We had actually an eat-in kitchen, a hallway. We had a bathroom off of that, and then a small living room. It actually felt great, but it was very livable. Lived there for a decade.
You had a question, and I want to make sure you get the answer.
We would get rid of the term like granny unit or like this outdated term of granny unit or.
We wouldn't use
We
that
would
term.
not use those-
Correct.
we would
I
not
was
use that
saying
term.
also known
Right,
as that, so
okay.
people knew what we were talking about.
Well, and I guess, keep in mind too that I think historically, for the last 100 or so years, it's been fairly typical that family members have had older family members
Sure.
come live with them. This is just branding it differently.
Sure. Yep.
I was going to say, a lot of the in-law apartments I know of, or people that have them, it's also accessible by the main house too. I don't know if that fit into the definition at all. Some are, you got to leave and walk in the different door, but all my friends with in-law apartments, it's like, just a door off the kitchen.
And it could be defined that way too. I mean,
Okay, a hallway, then the door off the kitchen.
You got to be able to hear them coming.
Yeah, keep the basement door closed, because that's where it is.
Any other questions or discussion about that? I think we can move on.
I think that if you go to the next slide, I think we've really covered it. Again, we're not assuming that this village board is going to, make any sorts of decisions for us tonight, but really in terms of where we're going, we're going to finalize the parking study. We're going to kind of keep working on the parts we can work on the code, but really then we need to, get this sort of direction from you all so that we can, create the regulations appropriately. And so I'm happy to come back another night when appropriate and kind of continue the conversation. So if there's other discussion, we can have that.
Is there anything you'd like to discuss at this point in time with Chris? Wow.
You
I
certainly
mean,
have-
I think not at the moment. There's a lot. I think it's been good to go over what was heard, what was seen, and it sounds like the other areas of the code there was general consensus, and so there's more to sift through. But understanding that these are the things that you wanted us to have us put that in our mind so that we can give you direction on how to continue to develop. the code. So I think, I might have some other, I'm curious to see what the other areas are. But I think for right now, I think that gives us some stuff for us to, chat together on.
Sure. So I'm gonna come to you, I promise. I thought you looked. I saw your hand reaching. It was reaching. I just want to go back to the non-conforming regulations because that's not really anything that we spend time talking about
But we should.
but we should.
we should.
So what I wanted just to ask you briefly, not for the next hour,
Okay.
but briefly, give us an overview of the kinds of things that are contained today in the non-conforming regulations. Is there something?
Yep, there is, we definitely have non-conforming regulations. One of the items in there is if you, let's say you are a two-family and you are on Woodlawn and you burn down, you have a year to rebuild as a two-family. So that's in there. Those are the things that are typically captured in the what if something horrible happens. Again, the non-conforming section also covers, as we mentioned, you can't make any improvements. They want the intent of non-conformities when we leave them out of a district is we don't want them in that district. But again, as I mentioned, non-conformities are typically our most interesting parts of a community. And so I think there's a push now in a lot of zoning codes to think about how we allow nonconformities to continue to exist on appropriate terms. So not saying, hey, let's craft a nonconforming section of code that allows for major expansion, but how does it allow it to continue to be maintained and an integral part of that community? So I think my personal feelings is that communities don't spend enough time evaluating their nonconforming regulations because they're very important. They're not exciting, but they're very important to how your community functions.
I know you're going. Is it likely that you're going to come back at a later time with other changes to the did I ask your question? No. Oh, is it likely that you would come back later and say, here are these other things in the non-conforming area, because there are so many different segments of the code that we think you should take a look at too?
Yes. So, Chris put up the slide that showed all the table of contents, so your signs, parking, et cetera, et cetera. The non-conforming regulations apply to the entire village. And so part of that is ensuring that that non-conforming section addresses what we need it to address. Just as signage addresses what we needed to address throughout the village.
Okay, Emily, I'm done talking. Thank you.
Okay, let's flip the switch completely. So we have a non-conforming property that's a 2 or 3 family. Let's say we adopted a mechanism, I think is what you called it with option A. If that mechanism was adopted, could the owner of that home then switch it to a single family?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So part of being non-conforming is we want you to become conforming.
Okay.
Right? So that's an ideal situation.
Okay.
So any unit, any point can say, you know what, I have this large house and it's 3 units, but my preference is to be
You
a
win the
single
lottery
family.
and then you want to turn it into
Correct.
a single family.
You can deconvert. Does it take a little bit of work? Yes. But there are a number of properties that I've seen over the course of my career that have made that decision to deconvert from a 2-family or a 3-family to a single family.
Okay.
And a lot of this that we talk about is really based on the market. It's market driven.
Yep. Okay.
There's one directly across the street from me. Used to
I
be
think there's
2-family.
actually people in the room that might have done that to properties they own. Okay, and then a clarifying question. So the working group, the zoning board working group, it has sort of settled, if you will, on option A and option B.
Option B was not recommended, but it was something that was desired to bring up in conversation as another option.
Okay.
So it was a 3-2 vote.
Okay, and so it was largely recommended by the working group that option A, implementing some sort of mechanism to allow these non-conforming properties to
Improve.
improve. and shine and work.
Correct.
Okay. And then those were the only two options. It was option A and option B. Option B was not recommended, and then this accessory dwelling unit was a completely separate. Okay.
Well, I think, if I understand, they were related, but, right, they were related but separate things, right? One is acknowledging that there are non-conforming uses. What do we want to do about them? Do we want to allow folks who live there to remain living there? And the answer was yes, we definitely want to do that. And then, like, sort of the follow-up question to that was, how much do we want to allow that around? And that was related but a separate topic, right? And then there's the ADU.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to characterize it, yeah. But I think the ADU is clearly a separate.
A separate.
Yeah.
That's how I was.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't certainly option C.
No,
Okay.
it's a separate question.
Yes,
Still
okay.
related to, again, it's within the single-family district, that's why.
Sure,
I'm bringing it up,
okay.
'cause that's what people want to talk
Okay.
And option B was an option that was discussed at great length by the zoning working group to figure out, is this a route that should be pursued?
And so the recommendations that have been presented in terms of the accessory dwelling unit topic were the ones that the working group was comfortable with.
Correct.
Okay. And you are going to provide these slides with these specifics to us after the meeting.
Correct. It'll
Okay.
be posted on the zoning code
Okay. I took
update
notes,
webpage
but
and also
I'm sure,
provided to
yeah.
each one of you.
Okay.
And my door continues to be open all the time. I'm
And then
happy to
all of
chat.
those other million topics that fall under zoning, we're going to address those at another meeting. Because this is, like you suggested, was just two small pieces of the,
These were the topics that we really needed to get direction from
Yeah.
the village board.
okay.
The other topics, I would argue, are ones that we have feedback. We can start crafting a draft code for reaction, obviously, from the public and from the village board, and then adjust as necessary.
So, do you have questions, Trace?
Yep, just to
Jump in.
super clarify, the picture that was put out to garner a lot of reaction, letting people have something to refer to, right, when we went into our public engagement.
The map.
The map.
The map.
The
that-
map.
Can we
that
put that
had-
up?
If you go forward.
Oh, it's actually back. Or, yeah, I'm sorry, forward, yes.
The map was what got us all engaged.
You can keep going, next slide. One up, sorry, previous one, the yellowish one, that one. There we go.
So this map, the bright yellow, and this was the original map for the engagement, right? That bright yellow was all of that is currently zoned single family, and we wanted to change it to get the reaction or input.
So these districts, the unique part is that we have a multitude of districts that allow only single family. But within those districts, they are not solely single family as that map demonstrated, that there are a
Yep.
number of uses within there. The intent of producing this map, which doesn't vary a whole heck of a lot from the boundaries for the other, was to say, this is what the existing conditions are. What is the next step for this district? Do we want to increase those numbers of 2 and 3 family? Do we want to maintain what is there? What does that look like? Because again, in the comprehensive plan, it talks about creating housing diversity and additional units, and where appropriate, allowing the conversion of single family to 2 family. So we wanted to ask this question, and when we initially introduced the zoning code project, we mentioned that a lot of the things that were going to be pulled out of the comprehensive plan, and then we were looking for the opportunity to refine those concepts, to figure out what was the desire of the community to move forward.
Something I'm just gonna, I think it gets confusing because people see a map and they're like, it's zoning. It's the character district. So there's a definition that goes with each one of those colors. And the reason I know is because I got to read every single one of those characterizations and then go, this is wrong, take this out of here, or this is right, leave it in. So if you go back to the comprehensive plan and go to this section, there's a characteristic that goes with the very pale yellow. And then there's a different characterization of what those neighborhoods look like and consist of. That is the yellow. And then when you get to the light orange, that's a different one. It doesn't necessarily go exactly the way our zoning map does. It's similar. And I know you're the expert, but I spent a lot of time working on this, so I remember the process, and it's similar, but it's not exactly. Where's Don? We spent time working on this. But it's not exactly one for one to a zoning code map. I just wanted to clarify.
That's definitely accurate.
I guess it was for the layman in the language, so it would still stay, just trying to understand option A that was recommended. That would not, if it's zoned single family now, it would stay that way with a huge, or just a really good look at the non-conforming regulations. And that's what I really wanted the public to know, that if you're currently zoned single family, the recommendation is that your neighborhoods will stay single family. We're just gonna add some non-conforming regulation for maintenance. So they're not gonna come in, it's not gonna be an automatic allowed use and changing these single-family zonings to multifamily or 2 or 3s.
That's correct.
That the
Under option A.
recommendation is keep it all single-family zoning.
That is accurate, yes.
I just wanted that clearly out there. With this other stuff too. And this is only the residential zone. We still have the business and the other corridors that will have housing pieces in it too.
Correct. And we've had discussions about encouraging residential in our downtown. We talk about the way the village was historically commercial on the first floor, second, maybe third floor residential. And so we've had discussions about increasing the opportunities for residential downtown.
Separate discussion, so there is another housing piece that could come in some of these other discussions down the road.
Correct.
Okay?
I'm checking around to make sure everybody got their questions answered. So I know that you were going to discuss it, but I'll lead into that discussion. So are we planning to have another meeting in the near future to get feedback from the board on those 3 particular options?
Yes, we're happy to come back.
Do we put this out to the community again to get feedback in a much similar manner as?
So the next opportunity for public outreach is when we, at your direction, create a draft, and then that is put out for the public to comment on and react.
Okay.
And of course, for the village board to comment on. And then further refining of that draft code will occur.
So the public will have an opportunity to see a draft, okay, and comment on that.
Correct.
Okay, that feels good.
Okay. I'm just double checking. Are we good if we
Yep, I just
wind
needed
things up?
simple language, nice and clear.
Okay. Then I'm going to let you wind things down for us. Do you have a slide? Was that last slide that?
The last slide said thank you, so.
Okay.
And thank you.
Then I'm going to take that opportunity I want to thank both Chris, Jill. I want to thank our zoning ZBW, right? Zoning working, ZWG. I want to thank all the members of the zoning working group, whether they're here this evening or whether they are in absentia this evening, because I know they have put a lot of thought and time and effort into trying to find a place of consensus. That doesn't mean that everybody gets everything that they want, but a place where we can be agreeable in the middle. And I know they are very measured and concerned and want to do the best for this community. And I really want to thank them for their time and their effort, and also for being a little vulnerable to share with other people in your work group that maybe you feel differently than they do, but in a way that's not argumentative, that's looking for collaboration. So I really want to thank them. I want to thank all the members of our community who came here this evening to hear where we are in this process. We've got a long ways to go, but I think this is really good to hear what the group is working on and how they're trying to take into consideration all the comments that they got from members of this community about what people liked, what people didn't like, and incorporate it in a way that works so that the majority of our zone, that we can have a great place to live, that we can support the houses that people have in this community, whether they have single family or multifamily, non-conforming, that there's a path forward to make sure that we can have a great community and take care of the properties in our community. And I want to thank the members of the board because I know this is challenging. It's not something that we do every day in our lives. So I want to thank you all for being here and having rapt attention to the presentation and taking in all this information, except for Adam, because Adam does this in his normal life. But I still thank you for being here. With that, are we going to plan offline the next time that we're going to meet and then we'll publicize it? I don't think we have dates right now, but it'll be, what do you think, a few weeks?
It's entirely up to the village board. When you're ready to have Chris and I back for further discussion, we will make ourselves available.
Okay, how about if we can email and, if we wanted, if we feel comfortable, where are we in the month? We could
24th.
We could have,
Working session is on Monday.
I don't know that, I want to give everybody a day or two more than that, but maybe we
Yeah.
could tag it on to our next village board meeting. I don't foresee this being a long discussion. It gives people a few weeks to let it permeate, go back and read it, make sure that you really feel comfortable, that you understand what was shared. Give Jill a call if you have a question. And then maybe at the end of our next village board meeting, which will be, oh my gosh, in November, we can take that as an action towards the end of the agenda. I'm looking at you, Brian, to give feedback from the board that can be shared with the zoning working group. Does that sound fair? Can everybody?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. We do that, and then that way, the working group and our consultants can then work to address any questions that come up, and we can. Is your thought there, Julie, that after we talk amongst ourselves, we have another chance to chat with Fisher, and then say, all right, here's the task, move forward?
Yeah, I think if you have a lot of questions, address them in between now and the village board meeting in November. And then maybe we can just put this as an item that now that we've had this time to work on this and you can talk to Jill, you can talk to Chris, you can check in with the members of the zoning working group, that when we get to that meeting, one of the last items on there will be to say, I would assume that we would take a vote and determine, do we support adding option A to the agenda, to the draft? Do we support adding option B to the draft? Do we support adding the ADU section to the draft? And we'll just take a vote and move on from there. Does that sound okay with y'all? Yep. All right, I think we've made a little decision. So we'll plan to do that at the end of our village board meeting on November, I don't know if it's like the 5th is Tuesday, add 5, the 12th, 11th, 12th, one of those days. Whatever our normally scheduled village board meeting is. Okay. With that, any last opportunity for discussion about this amongst the board? Thank you. Thank you, Chris. I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Trustee Mishler.
Second, Trustee Basky.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And that was at 7:15 p.m. Thank you so much for being here this evening.